Is the dynamic duo of Lars and Dunn done?
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. We're meeting for the first time. My name is Erica L. Ayala. I am a contributor to CBS Sports and also the founder of Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. Before we get into today's show, I want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You should head over to FanDuel, and if you place your first $5 bet when you create your account, you will get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can get that by visiting FanDuel.com. Larson and Vince Dunn, are they no more? Well, the short answer is we don't know. We know that Vince Dunn made his preseason debut in Calgary, got a little bit undressed on the shorthanded goal, but he was not playing with Adam Larson. And in one of the intermission reports, said that he missed playing with Adam Larson. Now, on the one hand, this is something that we've talked about here on Locked On Kraken as a potential possibility. On the one hand, you have a new head coach. You also have some new personnel, particularly thinking of Brandon Montour and Riker Evans, that you're going to start integrating into the Seattle Kraken system. On the other hand, being in Seattle, I'm currently on the road, but we'll be back in Seattle soon, being in Seattle and talking to Dan Bylsma, one of the questions that I asked him is, even though he's not new to the organization per se, he has been here effectively since the beginning by way of the AHL teams when we were co-parenting with the Charlotte Checkers, and then, of course, as the head coach of the Coachella Valley Firebirds. So he's familiar with the players. He's familiar with the systems that Dave Haxtell was running, and he's also familiar with stepping into a head coaching role in the National Hockey League. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because on two separate occasions, when I asked Dan Bylsma, Disco Dan, about what his process, he and the coaching staff, what their process was about finding the balance between imparting their systems, their kind of way of doing things, while also being able to honor and keep the integrity of what's happening, on both occasions, the one thing that Dan Bylsma mentioned that he wanted to sustain in what he called a, quote, delicate balance between bringing in his systems his way and honoring the culture that started before. The one thing that he mentioned that he wanted to keep intact was the defensive side of things and overall the culture, but particularly the defense. He's very cognizant of what the analytics say. You know how I feel about defense, and I'm probably a little bit more passionate about defense in all sports than most people. And I think there is an eye test defense and there are the analytics defense. That being said, he wants to keep the defensive integrity of the Seattle Kraken. So you could argue that just hearing Dan Bylsma say that means that it should be a no-brainer, right? That Adam Larson and Vince Dunn stay together as the, is that Al Green? I'm not going to say it. But anyway, I believe it is Al Green. So in love with you. I lied. I sung a little bit. Anyway, such a good song. The Reverend Al Green. I digress. Are we going to see Lars and Dunn stay together? I've talked about this dynamic duo just a few weeks ago, maybe less, honestly, on the show. Our top D pair, right? I don't think that you can say that that's not the case. And another thing that we know is very clear is that Vince Dunn, his confidence, whether it's being tongue-in-cheek, him, breaking the news of Larson's re-signing, Vince Dunn is comfortable playing with Adam Larson. He's confident playing with Adam Larson. He's felt that he's gotten better defensively because of playing with Adam Larson. So is that a duo that you're going to break up? Are you breaking up the band, Dan? The answer is yes and no. Yes and no. So how are two things true? I know in the world that we live in, it is hard to imagine that two truths are possible, two or more, dare I say, are possible. But here's what we heard from Dan Bilesma in the last 2 days. On the one hand, the roster has slimmed down. And we're going to talk about that because today's game is the last preseason game. It's a home game. And the Seattle Kraken will be taking on the Edmonton Oilers. So on the one hand, there's still a lot of tinkering that's happening. That being said, Dan Bilesma has also said, even now in the tinkering phases, because this is still preseason, that there are things that are going to start to fall into place and be refined. So again, does that mean that we have Adam Larson and Vince Dunn together? Well, it could. But what Dan Bilesma also told us is that even after the preseason, he likes the idea and has practiced the idea, the concept, if you will, of having players play with multiple people. Now, he was talking, I don't know more specifically, but more specifically, he was talking about forward lines, and I think we've seen the experimentation more so there's just more personnel, right? We've seen him mix and match the lines. He also has told us, again, in the last 2 media days, he's been asked a lot of questions about the roster. Again, we'll get into that. But he said that you can expect, and he likes that his players are comfortable playing with a few different lineups. So again, what does that mean for Larson and Dunn? I guess the short answer is we just don't know. There is something to continuity. There is also something to a fresh approach. Obviously, it helps because it makes a little bit more work for the opposition to be able to game plan. That being said, or I should say, before I move on to the other side of the coin, I think another thing, and we saw this a lot, and I mean a lot last season, injuries. Injuries are bound to happen. The Seattle Kraken know all about injuries, right? So you have to be prepared. You have to be nimble. On the other side of the coin, I do like consistency. And I think there have been times under the Dave Haxtell era where we just didn't get that consistency. Now, you have to take into account those were the first 3 seasons. Some of these guys have been playing together with the Seattle Kraken for a while. You always have to give or take a little bit when you come into a new season because trades happen, retirements happen, injuries happen, et cetera, et cetera. All of the sports things, right, happen, which is why a roster might not be a carbon copy. Some of you don't even know what that is. It might not be a carbon copy going from one year to the next. So again, what does that mean for Larson and Dunn? I honestly don't know. And I'm okay with that. I think that there's a part of me that wants Vince Dunn with Adam Larson. If that's who he's comfortable with, if that's who he's confident with, we need confident defensemen. We need comfortable defensemen. We need offensively minded defensemen who are learning and are confident and are ready for the challenge to up the ante on the defensive side of their job. I want all of those things. And there's another part of me that is thinking, where are we at when it comes to the tipping point of having to have 2 players play together? Does that mean they're the right fit? They might not be the right fit. This is a broad strokes question. This is not specific to Vince Dunn or Adam Larson or anyone else. But it seems like Dan Bilesma wants players to be thinking quickly on their toes and fit into the culture of the team, not a specific line. Just in the ways that some of our players have talked about the team in the past, I wonder how this is going to go over with the team. Because there have been times where we've heard forwards, we've heard D-men say, I'm playing with another person, another few people, a couple of people every time I go out. Like, how do we get something going here? So I don't know. So even though this is a segment talking about Larson and Dunn, and if the dynamic duo is effectively being broken up, I think it's maybe more so a question or an investigation and analysis of Dan Bilesma's philosophy. On this one, I agree with Dan, and I like how he shakes things up a lot. On this one, I'm not sure. It's too early for a lot of this. Am I panicking that Adam Larson and Vince Dunn might not be together? No, because I kind of saw this coming. Again, new coach, new players, but new systems, all of those things. Do I think there is a world in which maybe even in the immediate, I don't think so much long term, but in the immediate, this could be an obstacle for the Seattle Kraken? I do think it can be an obstacle if Vince Dunn and Adam Larson are not playing together. And I think Vince Dunn is more of the liability in that situation than Adam Larson. But let me know what your thoughts are. Are you all about Larson and Dunn? Do you want that duo to stay together? Do you have concerns if the roster specifically with those two shakes up a little bit too much? I want to hear from you because, as you probably have seen from this segment, I don't think we know. We don't have enough information, and we're still waiting on the final kind of roster and what we'll see today. We probably will see Adam Larson and Vince Dunn because here's another thing, right? They have to be on the same roster to play together, and we haven't seen that because Vince Dunn, well, he hasn't played in the preseason. So that's another little wrinkle to this. It might be a moot point. We see what happens tonight. We see what happens against St. Louis in effectively like a week. And this is a moot conversation, but I think it is an interesting one, and it gives us a little bit of insight into how Dan Bilesma thinks and what his philosophy is. So coming up next on Locked On Kraken, I do want to talk about the roster updates. We have some players that were reassigned that have gone through the waiver process, so we'll talk about that. And then, kind of set us up for tonight. Of course, you want to win. You want to win every time you hit the ice. But what does winning look like? Is it the score? Is it the final score? Is it the box score? What do we need to see from the Seattle Kraken? And that's how I see preseason. So what do we need to see from the Seattle Kraken tonight to feel confident going into the first home game? We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Gametime. If you listen to the show, it should be no surprise that I love the Gametime app. I love that I can use the app and take a look at the seats in the arena, in the ballpark, at the venue that I'm thinking about before I buy it. So what is my vantage point? Sometimes I like to be facing one way as opposed to the other. You can look at all of that in the Gametime app. What I also like is that Gametime can really take some of the labor, if you will, out of finding tickets. And that is because they take a lot of labor out of it. But I'm specifically talking about Gametime picks. It's a curation that Gametime now has that makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theaters, etc. Now, they will take a look at the shows or the events that you're looking to attend, and they will filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I also like the all-in pricing, which is a feature you can toggle on or off, and this feature will show the total up front with no surprise fees at checkouts. Great for someone who's balling on a budget. And then, of course, there is the Gametime guarantee. Gametime, you will get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. It's game day also. That and more coming up on Locked On Kraken. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. We are going to have more women's hockey to talk about on the Locked On NHL show coming up for our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight. So make sure you check out the Locked On NHL channel for all of the updates. And of course, every other Friday for the women's hockey spotlight featuring, that's right, me, your very own host of Locked On Kraken. All right, let's talk about the roster. We did have some movement between the Calgary game and tonight's game against the Edmonton Oilers. So I want to break down what we got here. The Seattle Kraken placed the following players on waivers for the purpose of being assigned to Coachella Valley: Brandon Bureau, Max McCormick, Ben Myers, Gustav Olofsson, Mitchell Stevens, and Alice Stedska. And then also sent directly to Coachella Valley, Edward Shala, who had a goal recently. V.A. Ottavainen, really have liked his preseason and training camp. And Jacob Melanson. So, the Seattle Kraken are definitely making some moves, and we know this is what needs to happen. They have to whittle down the roster even further. And so this is just a part of the process. Now, we did hear earlier today, that all of the players that I mentioned that were placed on waivers cleared waivers, and so are headed to Coachella Valley. And then we will see from there how much time they spend in the Valley versus with Kansas City and the like. So, and also we didn't mention this, but Nicolas Brouillard and Luke Henman both cleared waivers. We talked that they were on waivers, but I just wanted to update in case you didn't already know, but they have cleared waivers. So now with that in check, as of yesterday, and this is some great work that our friends at Sound of Hockey did. They have a full list of the players, which sits at 24 remaining on the roster, are $2.3 million over the cap, and quote, assuming no use of long-term injury reserved, LTIR, or trades, the Kraken will need to make 3 more cuts to become cap compliant by next Tuesday. Now, the likely suspects, so to speak, in the final cuts would be Ryan Winterton, John Hayden, Cale Fleury, and Josh Mahura. And you need at least some combination of, it's tough. I mean, Winterton 828, Fleury at 800K, 775 for Mahura and John Hayden. For my money, Winterton, of this particular group, Winterton has stood out the most to me. Do I think that he can squeeze his way into an NHL roster? Well, that's the question, right? Has Brandon Tanev specifically done enough in, yes, the preseason / training camp, but also what is his trajectory? I don't get the sense that the Kraken are necessarily moving on from Tanev. And like I've said before on the show, Turbo, his battery pack kind of fits really well, right, with what I think Dan Bilesma wants to do. So it's going to be interesting to see how things move around for the Seattle Kraken moving forward. And we've got one more preseason game and then a few practices before the team really has to figure out what they want and how they're going to move forward. And I think that leads me to the next part of this podcast that I really want to talk about. And that is, what do we need to see? What do we realistically need to see from the Seattle Kraken? And I'm going to give you what I think we need to see. And, that's what we're going to talk about coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel, has been with us just like you. They're an OGer. They're an everydayer when it comes to supporting the Locked On Network. And if you're an NFL fan, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, which, of course, we know as America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page where you place your bets. That's informed decision-making, people. Check it out. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So go check it out. Are you taking the over or the under on how many wins the Seattle Kraken are going to get this season? If you checked out our roundtable, or as I like to call them, squad casts, which also squad shows are now a thing on Locked On. Just remember where you heard it first. Anyway, I digress. Are you taking the over or the under on what we talked about on Monday? 87.5. That's the over under on FanDuel at the time that we recorded that. What are you taking? Well, check it all out over at FanDuel.com. And if you're placing bets on the NFL, you can also check out those live play-by-play, latest stats, and so much more right there on the same page where you place your bets. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Start your account. Remember, that is FanDuel.com. We hope that you gamble responsibly. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken part of your daily destination. We have a great day. Ooh, haven't done that in a while. Felt kind of good. The Edmonton Oilers rolling into town. Gonna be at Climate Pledge Arena. Here's what we know regarding the roster. I more or less told you, but yes, Adam Larson. Yes, Vince Dunn. We also, and this will go by numerical order, Borgen, Eberle, Stevenson, Beniers, Tanev, Schwartz, McCain, Tolvanen, Oliver Bjorkstrand, Jamie Alexiak, Ryan Winterton, Yanni Gord, Riker Evans, Shane Wright, Brandon Montour, Andrei Burakovsky. We did hear, and will probably be the last time we will hear, that Philip Grubauer is going to go the distance. And Joey Decord will backstop him. We've only got 2 goalies in camp, so that stands to reason. What do we need to see? I still want to see more from the Seattle Kraken when it comes to playing solid defense in all 3 zones. This is just something that, the Seattle Kraken, I don't think have been great doing so far this preseason. And you just have to go by the raw stats because every game the rosters have been a little bit different. But, I want to see the Seattle Kraken continue to develop. I liked that we went toe-to-toe with Calgary. We struck first, getting that first goal, and what a beauty it was. But the Seattle Kraken are still struggling in some areas. Eli Tolvanen, gets that first goal, but then we give up 2 goals straight away, and the lead is donezo. Well, not straight away, but in the first period, I should say. We were able to get one back in the third to take it into overtime, but then, and memory serves, Vince Dunn was on the ice again, and he's just coming back, so got to give him a little grace. But just a little bit of miscommunication, being just a touch out of position. I think I talked about the shorthanded goal. That was the goal in the second period, the only one in the second period. Just a touch out of position. I didn't think Vince Dunn was in great positioning on the overtime goal by Kadri. So these are things that I want to see the Seattle Kraken continue to improve upon. Overall, I think the shots on goal, especially in that last Calgary game, were pretty solid. The face-offs were good. Oh, the power play. 16%. 1 of 6 against the Calgary Flames. You got to be better. You got to be better. And it's been something the team has practiced since the Flames game. And again, personnel is going to change up a little bit, but you have to take advantage when you have the advantage. That's what it's there for. You are getting a golden opportunity here. It's not a foregone conclusion that you're going to score on the power play, but 1 of 6 bites at the apple. We only gave up 1 power play. So I do like that. I like the discipline. I've seen the discipline increase over the preseason. So, I like that personally. But, I think the Seattle Kraken are doing better at this. It's gotten progressively better throughout preseason, but we don't need the perfect pass. We just need something to happen. And Allison Ballard has a really great graphic location of every Seattle Kraken goal so far. You've got like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 shots in the slot area. Only 3, including 2 in that kind of slot area, that are above the circles, and a lot are if we're coming down the ice or on that right hand side. But also there's clusters of goals that are close to the net, rebounds, tic-tac-toe passes. I want to see so much more of that this season. And that's where the high IQ of players like Chandler Stevenson, Shane Wright, Matty Beniers has to come up huge. And all of those players happen to be centers, but we have to see more from all of those guys. I think things have quieted down as far as what Beniers and Wright are being asked to do. And I don't know how I feel about that. On the one hand, well, for Matty Beniers, he's returning. For Shane Wright, maybe it's that Dan Bylsma kind of knows what he's about. He talked about Shane Wright again in the last 2 days, saying that, he's not bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. He is here to play. He's here to compete. We've been talking about that for weeks, for months on the show. I still need to see more of Shane Wright. I still need to see more of Matty Beniers, because in my estimation, I love what Chandler Stevenson is doing. We're going to do a stock up, stock down, spoiler alert, tomorrow, and we'll talk about that. But we can't only have Chandler effective in that role as a centerman. We need those young guys, especially if they're going to be the centerman that we see on the ice. They have to step up. And who else is in the pipeline, right? Who else is, as far as a center, I guess you could move McCann around, but that's one of those things where moving McCann around with regard to the players, the personnel, sure. Do we really want to see another season of Jared McCann playing center? It has nothing to do with his capabilities. We know that he's done that in the past. And what is the front office doing to make sure that we don't have to resort to that? And that's putting aside that Dan Bylsma wants to mix and match. That, I think, is different than just not having the personnel, right? So I know I talked about a lot here. I always want to see better defense. I think we just need to be a little bit more swift and commit earlier to get to the spot. You have to make that commitment. You can't lollygag. We can't be lollygaggers. You have to get to the spot. And I don't think the Kraken are always doing that. Aggressive, get to the spot, make the stop, and then you go from there. But you have to get to the spot first. That is it's like a game within a game. And if you're a defensive-minded player, you get to the spot first, and then let the offensive player figure it out. Because when you get there first, what are they going to do? They can't do much. You got to get there first. So I want to see that intensity ramp up. Have to be better on the power play. And again, want to see some of the youths. Especially in the center position, step it up a notch. So we'll see what we get tonight. Edmonton, we will be back with another episode of Locked On Kraken. Until then, you know how we do. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. Loud and proud, we say, as always, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode.